like you're saying, it's using it.
Yeah, so that's the and then the fourth part. Okay, this is a very strange intro, but the fourth part, and we can recapitulate those other three. The fourth part is the ich, the I, which is then Anthroposophy as that, and that is from the north. So just to go over again, if we've got Bolshevism from the east, and again, Bolshevism, it's difficult to talk in these terms because do we know what these things are today? But that archetype, that template of Bolshevism using terror to drive change from that time of the Russian Revolution, but we still see that in the modern times, in various manifestations. That's the expression of using that anger, terror of the astral body. That's then that designation Prokofiev's giving them from the east. From the west, you have the hardening of the etheric body through Americanism, and again, this is not like it's not against America, It's Americanism as the term that was used by Steiner at that time to talk about a world of products and consumer products. And so again, we might have to find a different term for this.
Well, he distinguished it from the Britishism, if you will, because the Britishism is to turn the whole world just into a marketplace. But the Americanism sort of goes a bit further, and it just wants a comfortable life with things.
Oh yeah, that's quite interesting.
Exemplified in America, but
yeah, that's great to distinguish between that Americanism and sorry, I'm going to put my.
It's great as well because you're talking about four, and it's quite correct because the anthroposophical fourth that you mentioned, Rudolf Steiner, of course, didn't call it that. He called it Goetheanism because he didn't, point to himself, but to Goethe, the forerunner for that. So that's the other ism, the fourth ism.
Yeah, exactly. And apologies I just had terrible sound.
That's great. That's loud and clear.
I had terrible sound, but now I'm back in full Technicolor. But yeah, I mean, exactly that Goetheanism as the fourth potential underneath. If we going back, that Bolshevism from the east, the consumer Americanism from or consumerism or the life of comfort and goods, from the west, and then this Jesuitism in terms of using occult knowledge to drive change globally for certain power interests, as Jesuitism of the physical from the south, and then from the north, that's the potential, the possibility of spiritual science, like you're saying. Goetheanism is that active ich, where you say, I'm not hypnotized, I'm awake, I'm going to use my thinking to think through how these things all fit together. That is the anthroposophical, the Goethean spirit, which in terms of geopolitics, you're looking at history and saying, I can be equally as exact and scientific in my looking at these things phenomenologically as I can as a scientist who identifies these are the different stages of the development of a plant, and I can see this plant as a picture in my thinking.
That is the point, because the point being that the first three characterizations, Americanism, consumerism, Jesuitism, and Bolshevism, are born out of our habits of the past, of the previous time just before Christ, or Christ, that impulse. We don't have to use that name. It's a universal impulse, nothing to do with the church as it is in itself. But the point was, at that time, as typified by the Greek culture, better a king in the land of the living, better a servant in the land of the living than a king in the land of the shades, because they had lost the connection, direct connection to the spirit. So it was about life here on earth. That was what the culmination of the fourth post-Atlantean epoch came to. And we're still living out of those habits in as much as we marry ourselves to consumerism, Jesuitism, and Bolshevism. And the Goetheanism anthroposophy is presenting the necessity now, which is we need to get back to the reality of the spiritual world. It's as, you know, there's a science of that as valid as a science of the material world. And it is essential. And, you know, it will happen one way or another for some, or hopefully everyone, because the point of physical, material, scientific realm is it is only able to take hold of and to work with what will pass away. It is only the spiritual element of ourselves that will continue beyond the end of the earth. The earth and everything in it will come to an end. It's only what we carry in ourselves, which is the eternal element. And that is a spiritual element. So it is the future. Yeah, so it will come to pass. The question just is how long will these hangouts from the past keep kind of lapping up all of our attention and holding us back?
Yeah, I think that's a great point to make, because you'll hear often people talking also anthroposophically about Ahriman and the incarnation of Ahriman, and we see all around us this Ahrimanized culture, tech, materialism, finance, all of those things. But to point out the fact that it needs its counterpole of Lucifer. And what you're saying about going back to the fourth epoch and the time before Christ, that is to regress, for us now to regress and go back to that fourth epoch, which is the impulse of Lucifer to keep you stuck in the past. And then you say, well, there's these elements that we can see today of the reincarnation of the Roman Empire in this kind of Ahrimanized society. Well, that's the use of the occult as well, the use of occult knowledge to hypnotize the masses, which has been a problem now for 100 years. That again is the use of that's what they would do back in the times of Christ and before Christ. You even go back to the times of the Egyptians. And if you say, well, how much do people realize this? This is debates that we have every day about getting frustrated with people who look at situations in the media and geopolitics, and this struggle to understand that there are occult means of using numbers, images, stories, narratives pushed through the media to incite people's emotions. And this is a whole subject that it should be taught in our schools. It's not going to be, and for me it also brings up questions in
Well,
terms of
it's approached in the Waldorf Steiner education. It's not taught, but the soul is left open to the possibilities of it.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting to discuss, or to look at how that is taught in.
But I'm just saying, you said it should be taught. It is possible to leave oneself open to it. That schooling is available. Someone's developed it, but
exactly.
it hasn't been taken up generally.
Exactly. And it's difficult to know how you would then talk about those things explicitly. And maybe you can't talk about those things explicitly. But if you've had that training, a Waldorf training in fairy tales, in the stories that come through those different epocha, what do we say in English? But through the different things on the curriculum of Waldorf, I think the training that you have there, the story of the Grail and understanding how to perceive evil the battle, the journey from good to evil, or from evil to good, and the transformation of the soul, I think it prepares you so well to be able to say, I can see it. I can see how propaganda or manipulation might be used on a world stage. And yet there's many people who do come from Waldorf and do come through that who struggle to see it.
I
And
think
that's
that
another, that is another something that one can't shy away from, in terms of saying, okay, we do have Waldorf, we do have what Steiner's given us, and yet there is an element of the spiritual nature of the world that we live in, especially since 1945, but you could say for 100 years, that is a spiritual thing about having one's consciousness darkened. And that is
I fear the Waldorf curriculum and, you know, the awareness of the teachers and what it's for and what they're doing and what it's about has not quite kept step with what you're indicating, the powers of darkness advancement. And it is darkness because it's just keeping us back asleep in the past. We can call it dark and evil, it not in emotive terms, but purely in the technical terms, because these things were legitimate in the past, in the sense that you raised ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, there was a flock and there were priests and there were things that had to be hidden because the majority of the population, you know, people had to be chosen, carefully selected and educated for years before they were ready. Now we're all ready, more or less, you know, to a greater or lesser degree. So these things are not legitimate now. And that is why they're darkness, and we can call them evil in a purely technical sense.
yeah, that's a fantastic point, to go back, and the Steiner identifies our time as a mirror of Egypt. And if you say, well, how can we understand that? Well, precisely in what you're saying. A world of symbols and hieroglyphs that the initiated could read. If you say, look at our society and say, we are also, to the extent that one is conscious of this, we are surrounded by a world of hieroglyphs, quite literally down into the programming of computers and things like this. But also culturally, Hollywood is littered. It's from in every single film with occult symbols.
Yes, and glyphs and runes.
Yeah, glyphs, runes, music
And
itself.
yeah,
Yeah, the arts, again, going back to this subject of Jesuitism and the arts, a way to influence the human being in an unconscious way. And again, this is coming back to something that we wanted to discuss today, to talk about the Rosicrucian, in a Rosicrucian sense. You don't influence the semi-conscious and the unconscious. You say transparently
anymore.
exactly what you don't do that anymore.
Since the impulse at the turning point of time, because that's the whole point, that revealed them publicly, and that was the germ for everyone to initiate themselves into those.
Yeah, that's absolutely essential, that a sense that of Christ as in the semi-conscious and the path to the Father, into the unconscious, into the will, is sacred since the turning point of time. That is the essential point. So for people with this knowledge to use that and say, well, we will try to influence the feelings and the will of the other person through music or through symbol, is completely inappropriate for the time we're in now. And of course, it can give you enormous power. That's why there was so much study of these things. If you look at all of the studies with the big,
And
well-funded NGOs behind, 1920s, 1930s, it was all about psychology. This is one of the big misconceptions about the First and Second World War. Behind all of this, the study was psychology. That was how can we use occult knowledge to steer the masses?
And that occult knowledge is as simple as plastering all over your newspapers, they're murdering babies in Belgium and eating them. And that's it. It's just because it's like plastered over and people just go about their daily business, soak it in a bit, it sinks down. They're not able to process it because it's not, you don't stop and you sort of, I mean, for a start, it's not true, but it's emotive. And so the subconscious grabs it.
Exactly. And I think, you know, that in my eyes would be morally like a war crime. And in fact, you would say that one of the deepest crimes, and when Steiner talks about actually, when he talks about black magic, he's talking about hypnotism as the greatest form of that,
Well,
because
not
it
even
takes away.
hypnotism. Sorry, just to butt
Yeah,
in the sense that on the surface it's hypnotism, but in a sense it's really just dream influencing, because people that are not waking up, you don't even have to hypnotize them. Do you know what I mean? You just guide their dreams.
yeah, sure. But the point I'm trying to make, and
Is
I think it's a
it's
really
done
important point,
hypnotically? Yeah.
is why does he call that black magic? Which normally we have, you know, quite dramatic
Yes,
pictures
Satanism
of.
and
And okay, you
devil worshippers.
can also talk about those things. It might not be the right forum for that, but why is hypnotism that? Why does he name that as such a serious problem? Because it takes away your own will to know the thing that is lying in your will, in your karma, what you've come here to do. If you cover that up, or the person is then, if you see, you know, a hypnotized person doesn't know why they're doing the things that they're doing, and
They
this
just
is,
do it.
they're just doing it,
Yeah.
and there's no conscious appreciation of that. Now, if you were to say that is one of the greatest sins, the sin against the spirit, that is the one that is not forgiven, as mentioned in the Bible. If
Right.
you understood that as the gravest sin, and you saw a state or states doing that, actually that would be the greatest war crime of all. And those kind of propaganda images of people stabbing babies in, you know, that was blatant all over propaganda from Britain, from Germany. And if you saw them continuing to do that, like today, which is still, those kind of things are still going on. Even if we take a safe example from Iraq, where you had it was a propaganda company that was hired, a PR company hired to say that they were, and this lady testified at the UN, you can find this example. And she was saying, oh, they were taking babies out of incubators and throwing them on the floor. And she testified before the UN. And then it was proved that that was a company that was hired to do that as a PR job, to help incite the whole conflict in Iraq. Now, once
It
you
was a
find that out,
script. It was a
yeah,
script. There was not a shred of truth in it at all.
exactly. And then we find out, like so many things, and there's nothing happens. There's no
Well, it's too late. It doesn't matter at that point, because the effect of the magic has already occurred the moment they announced it and splurged it all over their feeds to you.
Yeah, but the point that I want to make is that's such a serious, awful thing to be doing, and we're in a world where that it will not be morally held to account. And that's, I think, something that we continually you continually have to remind yourself, also to protect yourself from the hypnotism of this society on yourself. When you see things happening on the world stage which should have been stopped, and should be in a what we would call a more moral society, they would be stopped. And I think it's important to remember that, just so that you don't get lulled into this, like everything that's happened since 2020. And again, I'm not going to use those words, and simply because I can't. And that we're not going to go down that track, but just saying since 2020, yeah, there are things that have happened that, if they were dealt with in this this moral sense of what you have done to people, to people's lives, to people's businesses, those things would not be, would have to, in a moral sense, be judged by society as wrong.
It's very interesting you say that, Richard, because
I know.
yeah,
It's tricky. I get the
tricky.
sense it's a tricky subject.
But it's interesting what Rudolf Steiner says in relation to that. And I just want to say two things here, which one is that Rudolf Steiner said about the First World War, which he lived in, it's more than a war. It's gone beyond war. And that for a long, long time, I wondered what exactly did he mean by that? And what you just said started to make me think maybe that was what he's pointing at, is it's this great hypnotism, this great witchcraft, if you like. You know, it's this great occult capture of humanity on a vast scale. Then in relation to this, what we're characterizing with these terms, consumerism, Americanism, Jesuitism, and Bolshevism, and even if, you know, their actual original beginnings are in the past, what they are underneath, you know, that sort of outer shred is still present now. These he characterized as punishments against us who are not grasping the necessities of evolution in this time, and not grasping the necessity to wake up to the reality of the spirit. So on the one hand, yes, we can say that these people are culpable to the public whom they are committing crimes against. But on the other hand, you know, and this comes to the kind of sort of more cosmic dimension of sin and crime and punishment. In another sense, they are punishments on us for not waking up to the spirit.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because, you know, getting into describing these things about judgment, I was already floundering towards the end, because I know that, you know, you're putting this out and there's people like struggling, and I hear that voice, you know, that voice of
Injustice, sense of injustice.
Yeah, sense of injustice, but also sense of a sense of not understanding the magnitude of things. And if you don't understand the magnitude of things, and you haven't started to come to this need to see things from a spiritual perspective, then some of the things that we're talking about make people feel very, very uncomfortable. And there's that knee-jerk reaction like, oh God, I want to go back to things being black and white and good and evil, and that they were the evil people back then, and these were the good people, and I'm British and they were German, and you know that, and that's the same thing that we've got going on now. So that's what I'm saying, that I'm very thankful for you to just swoop in there and bring it back to that, to a better sense of the magnitude of these things, where that's a much more fruitful, for me, a much more fruitful discussion, where we can say, okay, as humanity, we're being judged on these things. And that is where then you can say, okay, fortified with this knowledge, and you can come into the end of the age of, the beginning of the age of Mikhail, end of the 19th century, and the fall of the spirits of darkness. That is such a helpful anthroposophical imagination of reality, because it then says this can help you to prepare your perception and your inner soul to start to perceive events of the 20th century, where you don't have to shut your eyes anymore. You can then say, okay, it's really bad. Yeah, we've got the First World War, Second World War, Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, Iraq, all of
Sudan, Angola,
all of
yeah,
the conflicts, and you don't have to then
Yugoslavia.
shut your eyes and say, well, I don't really, that's just overwhelming. I can't deal with all of that. I mean, you're dealing with millions, and again, this is going to push some people's buttons, but you're dealing with millions, hundreds of millions of deaths in Soviet Russia, in China, in Asia, in Korea, in Vietnam, even up to the present, in Iraq, in the Middle East. And I'm sometimes astounded, for example, when, and I'm not saying anything for and against here, when the bridge here in Rheinfelden is covered with 30 flags flying for the Ukraine, in the put there by the local authority. I don't think that's ever happened before. Normally you have all the flags for the different Swiss cantons, or the German flag as you go over into Germany. And this year we then had all of those flags. Now, I know we all want to feel compassionate and empathic towards what's happening in the Ukraine, but my goodness, where were the flags for flying for Iraq? Where were the flags flying for Afghanistan? It would be nice to put in a letter to my local authority and say, can we have a week of flags for Vietnam? Can we have a week of flags for Afghanistan?
They're still digging the bombs, the mines out of the ground. Children are still being blown up, in Vietnam by American mines.
Outrageous. And where is, I would like to write that letter. I would like to see, and where is, you write a letter about Ukraine, you get that letter published in the mainstream newspaper of Switzerland, and you're then hailed as a great compassionate thinker, and Zelensky is then beamed before Swiss University, and everyone asks, where Zelensky, where are you going to go on holiday? Where's your next holiday going to be? This pandering, like,
people like being inflamed and engorged by this passion for the now it's a mono nationalism of only one country matters in the whole world.
Yeah, and I think this is a topic that you and I were speaking about, that when you see this this in almost like this great flood of feeling for a nation, and Rudolf Steiner spoke about this, there's almost like a sexual element to it. If you can perceive that, you can perceive it in yourself, every time the World Cup comes around and, oh, England are playing football and I'm an Englishman, and you can feel it in your blood, and it's
Like
helpful
a sexual jealousy. It's that strong, of possession, of me and mine.
Yeah, and I think that's really a real helpful aspect of anthroposophy, and he was then identifying that at the time of the First World War, and how those, again, these are occult things that go right down into the occult knowledge of the body and of the blood. And this is again one of these Jesuit things of how do you use those instincts, fight and flight, sexuality, survival, and how do you manipulate those things? Well, this is a great example of how you do that. You use nationalism that's going to be associated also with sexuality, and that feeling of
Pride,
lust and pride for one's land. And again, this is
the motherland.
there's a positive sense of this, but you have to, I mean, when I hear the bagpipes play, you get stirred up, and
it's all positive because it makes us go to do something. But when that positivity is harnessed by others instead of oneself,
Yeah, I mean, we'd just come back to this so I hope that, you know, that clarifying a bit the difference between Rosicrucianism and Jesuitism is, have we did we clarify that?
I think we should say more on it, because the Rosicrucianism is touching the other, the Goetheanism, the Anthroposophy, which is about what you said, that what came at the turning point of time is a germ into all of us that is eternal and inviolable. It can never be touched, but we could completely ignore it as personalities. And so the Rosicrucianism gives birth to something like to Goetheanism, which seeks the spirit in the plant to grasp the actual spirituality of life, rather than just his chemicals, and explaining what they do. And then that leads to Anthroposophy, which actually grasps the spiritual realities of the relationship of the whole cosmos to the earth and to the internal being of the human being. And that would then come out in developments in art and education. For example, we spoke about education, which then it recognizes that eternal individuality, and it leaves it alone, but it kind of midwives and fosters all the elements that will allow that individuality to step out into its personality, into the environment in which it is embodied in this time, in the best, most harmonious and fruitful way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And if we get this from Goetheanism, from Rosicrucianism, it's that idea, the Goethean idea of the living picture in thinking, that we can see the living picture of the plant before us when we study that plant. So we then see like the 7 different stages of the plant. We hold that in imagination and say, okay, we can define those 7 different stages of the plant. We've got the sprouting, the seed in the ground, and then the blossom, and then the growth of the shoots of the leaves, and then the fruit, and then the dying away, and the cycle then goes round and repeats.
And it will go even further than that, from the idea in the hold in the imagination, is then it will be something that comes into oneself. So it will actually be in the same way that we physically see a plant, you will then spiritually see that living spiritual part of that plant, which is not manifest physically. So it becomes an actual spiritual perception. It's kind of like the next Humanity and Earth 2.0.
Yeah, that's really helpful, because when we speak about anthroposophy and Steiner, it can become a bit woo-woo, like with auras and the colors and things like that. But when, from that purely scientific sense, if you can follow it intuitively, that study and be exact in identifying those stages of the plant, not like a materialistic scientist, but a spiritual scientist who's watching how your feelings inwardly develop in relation to those different 7 stages, that's when it starts to become something that you can see inwardly. You're not kind of woo woo. I see, these different spirits, and that's, I think sometimes people can get a bit lost in a kind of atavistic sense of that sense of spirituality, whereas to be what Steiner was talking about was being very exact in your perception, and that's sun clairvoyance, where you're following in intuition, you're studying something. And that's what we're talking about also in terms of geopolitics. We're saying, study the thing exactly, notice what is being presented to you, study it and follow up where it comes from. And through that process of intuitive thinking and linking up the ideas, you're developing spiritual sight. And that's sun clairvoyance that Rudolf Steiner is speaking about. And if we go over from the plant to the human being. That's how he's then able to develop his perception of the human being and say the human being is an I, has an I. That's different from an astral, the astral body of his different thoughts, or all the different thoughts that you can have. There's something eternal that stays unshakable, and that is the human I. And that only comes through being able to feel and phenomenologically study the human being as they exist in psychology before you. And then he's able to say, to bring these other theosophical concepts and Rosicrucian concepts of the I, the astral body, the etheric body, and the physical body. And those are like essentials of Rosicrucianism, that so that you can then differentiate the different ethers, for example, and talk about Christ in the etheric. It becomes a possibility to speak about things in a scientific way.
Yeah. So in a Rosicrucian fashion, he's investigating accurately as the deeper reality in something, and Ridosana kind of utilized concepts that were already present in other streams like Rosicrucianism and so forth. I mean, he was in that to develop those concepts in a modern fashion, so they're not like old woo-woo, but very concrete, very related. So, you know, how the ether relates to the astral, the plants, and etc. etc. It's a very complicated because of course it's about a very complicated science, because it is a science how everything relates and it is distinguished.
Yeah, and it's a good point to make, because there are the Rosicrucian traditions as they still exist in the world, and there's the many different diagrams, which are also wonderful artworks of the different perceptions of the human being from this perspective. But I think what's helpful and what's very different also in relation to our topic about how one defends oneself against hypnotism in the present time is the older method of training, also Freemasonic training, was to learn to live with symbols and images in your soul. And that's the difference with anthroposophy, is you're then working with concepts. You're working with these designations of astral body, etheric body, physical body, so that you can see the realities that are depicted in the imagery and symbolism. And that's, again, if you've got a whole culture that's flooded with occult symbolism, a training in thinking through, in a Rosicrucian sense or a theosophical sense, what those symbols depict. That's what he's saying. That's how you stay conscious in the present time, and you're not hypnotized by living in an occult an occult society or an occult influenced society. And that's, I think, there's not enough understanding of that. Because people say, well, yeah, anthroposophy is too complicated. I struggle. It's too complicated.
It's too dry. It's too thinky. But that's the how and the why of not to be hypnotized, because with the symbols and images, they can evoke so much more, and you can kind of drop them into your subconscious and they will resonate there and develop without one being fully aware of what's going on. But concepts, ideas, they hide nothing from you. That is the whole point. If every human being has the thinking capacity to grasp any concept or idea, and immediately, like the concept of, let's keep it something simple, like well, cause and effect, instantly you know what those two mean. As soon as you've grasped it, as soon as you've got it, the cause and effect is there. It's not holding anything back from you. The only thing that you might not get is how that relates to something else. And that's again, that's the point of thinking and ideas and concepts, is one leads on to the other. And once you've got the other, you see that clearly. Then you can see how that relates to something else, something else, something else. And this is the way that you could say the Christ-given way that we have been given to initially enter into to have the universe revealed to us, so that we're not just creatures of the universe, but we become, partakers, and eventually we will be kind of creators in this universe. First, we need to get to know it. And concepts, they don't hide anything from you. They just allow you to lead on to the next relation. Whereas if, say you had water and you just looked at water, then it can be mysterious, and you could evoke impression of water and kind of like images of water and let them work on you in a semi-unconscious fashion. But if you study water and you develop the concepts of what water is about, water doesn't lose anything of its quality in that, its real perceptual quality and living quality, but it enables you then to see how it relates to everything else in the world. It's like water speaking to you, and the only way it can really do that clearly and not just stand apart from you is initially through ideas and concepts.
Yeah, I'd like to just pick up on that point and say, in a Rosicrucian sense, look at the images that we're sitting here with. So behind you, we have this northern lights, the flowing of this, yeah, and the green and the trees and a bit of your sofa poking through. And then, yeah, then behind me, this is from Blade Runner, yeah. So this is like the being in like the perfect. There's this whole theme in the newer Blade Runner film, which is about having a perfect cloned partner that you will be completely satisfied with. And it also evokes this whole kind of Platonic ideal of the feminine as the feminine goddess, or from the Aristotelian side, the feminine witch,
Temptress.
yeah. And so I'm just saying that because we're trying to show this, and we're talking about these subjects of what Rosicrucianism is, as opposed to Jesuitism. And so I'm very transparently trying to point out to people that, of course, when you're watching any image, we're then evoking certain ideas with the choice of graphics that we're sitting here with a background to us. And that's what I'm doing this to kind of show that process, whereby normally those things wouldn't be spoken about. It's just, oh, that's part of the logo, or that's part of the brand, or those ideas are not up for debate to talk about them. Now you could say, well, why have you chosen that image of the feminine goddess, or the feminine temptress, or what is that evocation, and why is she pointing to you as the little man standing bemused before the great figure? So that's that. There's that point, and picking up on the fact that one thing that we were talking about in our last talk was about the Great Reset. Do we have a small elite that know about these ideas, that will speak about these in private, or do rituals where these invoke these symbols, or we flood Hollywood with them and put them into media? And this elite know the deeper meanings behind them, because they're initiated into the various lodges where they're taught these things. And then as a mass, we're supposed to be oblivious to these things, and they're never up for debate. And these then have, or we don't even know how, the fact that these images will sink down through music, through images into our bodies and affect our will, and close off some of the possibilities for us in life. Now, if that's never up for debate, except when you get involved in to be initiated into a private club, or to, that's what Steiner, and that's why he had such opposition as well. He's saying, no, we're at a time where these things need to be known by people, otherwise the result will be continual chaos and catastrophe, because we've entered into a time where these spiritual ideas need to be known on a wider scale. And that's then the great resistance that came to him from established circles within the world. And this is, one can read about this,
I
so
don't know, just one thought to that there are still Rosicrucian groups that meet in private. And I think that's important, is that Rosicrucianism is a private stream. I'm using private especially to indicate that you can be invited, and you could be invited, and there's nothing malign about it, but they're just very private. And in that sense, they are still a hangover from the old sort of mystery schools. It's kind of like an interim between the old style before the turning point of time, before Christ, and the modern. So I'm just calling them private to distinguish them from the secret clubs, the secret societies that want to be secret because it gives them power over others. And then, as you just pointed out, you have what Rudolf Steiner developed out of what he learned through Goetheanism, Rosicrucianism, etc., which is a spiritual science offered in Anthroposophy, which is completely public, completely open, and for everyone who wishes.
Yeah, there's also things like you had anthroposophical medicine and eurythmy and the artwork that was the first Goetheanum. And again, these are examples of how occult wisdom is made then public. You can see many of the things from Aleister Crowley, for example. You can see Aleister Crowley doing a lot of those AERO signs of eurythmy, because these are part of traditions that live in some of the lodges and in some of these private groups within Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. The difference is that Steiner then brings this into a whole art form, where you can use all the letters of the alphabet, and you can weave these in with etheric forms of speech and music. So again, this is an example of how previously what might have been done in ritual and in a private setting can be made into an art form where everyone can partake. And it's not like trying to set up some antithesis between, lodges that have kept, there is some great things, and I'm not an advocate of some kind of polarization here, because there's great things that are done by some of these groups, and they do great things in society, some of them. There's other groups that link up people in a way that I would say is more dubious, where it becomes more like a gentleman's club for doing business and for exerting power in the world. And I think these things are, again, they should be up for debate. There shouldn't be like things should be discussed and not brought into that polarization where some people are very against Rudolf Steiner even to this day, from in certain circles, from established, it's still there. It's not like we don't have to be shy of talking about it. There is antipathy still to this day, and that people say that, like back then, that he revealed things that shouldn't be revealed. So I'd like to just move on before we've got, you know, like 5 minutes or so. I'd just like to discuss in relation to what we've discussed this post that I've done here, just with the 7, this is the 7 stages of Rosicrucian initiation. And you've got here, I thought it would be helpful. This is a depiction of a Hindu, the 7-headed Naga. Just to say, I'm posting that together with it. And you have on the Rosicrucian path, we have study of the kind of things that we're talking about as the first step, a preparatory step. Then we have the acquisition of imaginative knowledge. Then we have the appropriation of the occult script, learning to read the occult script. Then we have what's called here the rhythmisation of life, that bringing this into one's daily life. There's also how one meditates and how the breath changes the whole physical body through this process is another aspect of this. Then we have the knowledge of the microcosm and how you relate to the macrocosm, the great world outside, but self-knowledge. And at the end, he's talking about part of this is coming to see the guardian of the threshold and how that then relates to perception of the greater guardian of the threshold as Christ. And then number 7, what is called the attainment of godliness. And I thought I'd just bring those 7 steps here and just see if we could just wrap up by talking perhaps about some of those stages in relation to some of the things we've already said. I think it would be a good way to summarize and just bring that better understanding of what is the Rosicrucian path as opposed to an unconscious Jesuit path.
Yes, well, like I say, I imagine there are private Rosicrucian groups who have a taught. There's teachers, people who have attained godliness in that the sense of that 7th step, and so they have a direct teacher who's able to guide them through those processes. These will be exemplary people, not like me, who's just an ordinary guy who's but so there's those groups, but then there's also the public face, which is at least the preparation. It's at least the first step, the study, and the imaginative knowledge and the occult script, I think, is also
why would these be exemplary people and you just a normal guy? Can't well, you be
yeah, I can, and you know,
I want you to be exemplary. I just
yeah, but I haven't met a teacher yet who you know, I'm not quite at the point where I think the point I'm trying to, in the sense of, you know, gradations, who's better, who's worse, is if we're talking about an evolutionary scale, there's some people that are far in advance, pioneers, who and like Jesus Christ, who was, you know, planted the germ for all of us to follow, and you know, all of us will get there.
Are you, when you're speaking, then are you, just to clarify, are you saying then like are you talking about like an exemplary teacher within Rosicrucianism would be like an initiate then, like Christian Rosenkreuz?
No, what I meant was exemplary students. So Rudolf Steiner was a somebody who could teach people through first-hand knowledge of, I don't know how many of those steps, if in that gradation you gave, that he would have reached the head of the Naga. perhaps he had. And so, you know, as a teacher, you can always teach people who are just below you, as it were, you know, just using these relative terms, not in any judgmental sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that in that scale, I'm at the level of study. I have not obtained imaginative sight, because
I would question that.
well, I believe it's beginning, but in an intuitive sense, rather. So it kind of comes and goes. It's not really. It's still a. It's not. It's not on the scale where, you know, with sight, I just open my eyes and I see. I can't say that about.
I would question that, because the ability to be able to intuitively see things, like when you look at the geopolitical space, the things that when I talk to you about those things and I see something, and you'll be able to confirm it almost immediately. Now that comes from that is like a lightning flash. It's like an intuition. And there's no higher form of imaginative knowledge than that. You're able to link up one idea and to see the truth of it immediately. And that is something that not a lot of people have. And, you know, that was also something that I had to learn. So for many years, I didn't really know what was meant by imaginative knowledge on that Rosicrucian path. And so if I didn't know what it was, I was always feeling like you, I'm at the study stage, because I don't know what that other stage is, until I realized that, well, that you do that all the time, that to be able to perceive in imagination like you do in the physical world around you, like you see, okay, that tree's over there and it's about 5 meters away from the grassy knoll, the hill. But it's I can see that and distinguish that, and the sun's shining on that, and it's about 2 meters away from the bench. And if you can do that historically or with another person, to see how that thing is constructed in that Goetheanistic sense, that is the stage of imaginative knowledge.
Yes, I agree with you, but I think it also goes further in the sense that, and I could be wrong, you know, and this might be an obstacle in my way, but I believe it goes further in the sense that one then actually sees things that are not normally visible. So not just intuits them, but, and maybe it is more just a development of that intuition, so that one kind of like locks onto it straight away. But I'll give the example, say, of to see, say, my own or somebody else's chakra. Do you know what I mean? So these supersensible organs or organisms, organizations, and I could intuitively get a sense of where I am, or perhaps someone else is with, you know, this or that chakra, but I would not just be able to kind of go, okay, and look with my supersensible sight and confirm that intuition by actual direct sight. That's where I am with it. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, it's a really interesting topic to delve further into. I think we're coming to the end of what we can do in this session. I mean, it'd be great to pick up on that again. And it does go in the direction, again, of deeper levels of the Rosicrucian path, because with what you're just saying, I'll just touch on it, but the next stage after imaginative knowledge is to be able to read the occult script. Now, if you're saying to have that kind of perception of the different chakras, people do come to that. You hear a lot about that in New Age circles and in healing and things like that, where you address a specific chakra. In terms of what we're saying, though, that intuitive thinking to be able to say, okay, if I understand what that chakra works with, how that chakra functions, and then I have the other person before me, and I have a sense for how different structures are built in that person, then that next stage starts to awaken, where the occult script is you can actually start to read things that would be helpful, or things that the other person is not fully conscious of. And for me, that's the whole path of like psychology. And a lot of these Rosicrucian things, then they have their new age manifestation, but they also have a psychological manifestation, so that I can then give, I've told you before, I love some of these ideas of Lacan, Jacques Lacan, where he said, I just need someone maybe for a couple of days, to see someone for a couple of days, a couple of sessions, or an intervention can be one word said to a person. And if you know what that word, how to shape that word, that's part of reading the occult script, which can change immediately one of someone's chakras, if we speak from a new age perspective. And so that opens for me all kinds of new possibilities of how one discusses the use of the word, or the use of or what is the occult script. And again, that I think that brings fascinating things about how the spiritual world can speak to you in a very exact way. But anyway, I'm going to stop with that. This will be food for thought for next time.